Imagine a man so wealthy that his generosity crushed entire economies. A king whose single journey caused inflation that lasted for decades. A ruler who commanded so much gold that European map makers drew him sitting on a throne of pure wealth, dominating the African continent. His name was Mansa Musa, and in 1324 he embarked on a pilgrimage that would change the world's understanding of Africa forever. When he passed through Cairo with a caravan of 60,000 men, 12,000 slaves dressed in Persian silk, and 80 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold, the Egyptian economy collapsed under the weight of his spending. Historians estimate his wealth at over $400 billion in today's money, making him possibly the richest human being who ever lived. But this is not just a story about gold. This is the story of Mali, an empire that stretched across West Africa like a golden colossus, an empire built on intelligence, trade, faith, and power, an empire that the world forgot, but one that shaped the course of African and global history. Stay with us as we uncover the hidden truth of Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire. Welcome to Africa Hidden History. Today we journey back to the 14th century, to the heart of West Africa, where one of the most powerful empires in human history thrived in splendor and sophistication. This documentary explores the reign of Mansa Musa, the 10th Mansa, or emperor of the Mali Empire, who ruled from 1312 to 1337. We will walk through the golden cities of Timbuktu and Gao, stand in the great halls of Niani, and follow the legendary pilgrimage to Mecca that announced Mali's presence to the entire Islamic world. But more than that, we will examine the Mali Empire itself, how it rose to dominate West Africa, how it controlled the gold and sword trade that fueled medieval economies, and how it became a center of learning, culture, and Islamic scholarship that rivaled any institution in Europe or the Middle East. We will meet the architects of this empire, the scholars who filled its libraries, the merchants who walked its trade routes, and the warriors who defended its borders. And we will uncover the hidden truths, the stories that textbooks ignore, the African innovations that shaped global trade, and the legacy that continues to echo through West Africa today. This is not a story of savagery or backwardness. This is a story of brilliance, wealth, faith, and power. This is the story of how Africa stood at the center of the medieval world. Let us begin. The year is 1312. Across the world, great civilizations rise and fall. In Europe, the Middle Ages grip the continent. The Black Death looms on the horizon. Kings fight over territories. The Catholic Church dominates spiritual and political life. Cities are small, dirty, and disease-ridden. Most Europeans cannot read or write. In the Middle East, the Mamluk Sultanate controls Egypt and Syria. The Abbasid Caliphate has fragmented. Islamic scholarship flourishes in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo. The Mongol invasions have reshaped Asia. In China, the Yuan dynasty under Mongol rule connects the Silk Road from east to west. Marco Polo's accounts of the East fascinate European courts. And in West Africa, an empire rises that will eclipse them all in wealth and grandeur, the Mali Empire. To understand Mali, you must first understand the land. Picture the Sahel, a vast belt of semi-arid grassland stretching across Africa, just south of the Sahara Desert. Here, the landscape shifts between desert sands and fertile river valleys. The Niger River cuts through this region like a lifeline, bringing water, fish, and transportation to millions. This is a land of contrasts. Scorching days and cool nights, rainy seasons that turn dust into mud, dry seasons that crack the earth. Baobab trees rise like ancient sentinels. Villages cluster around water sources. Traders traverse paths worn smooth by centuries of caravans. To the north lies the Sahara, endless, unforgiving, deadly to those unprepared. But for those who know its secrets, the desert is a highway. Trans-Saharan trade routes connect West Africa to North Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Islamic world. To the south lie forests rich with resources, cola nuts, ivory, and exotic goods that northern merchants crave. And beneath the soil, in the riverbeds, in hidden mines known only to local peoples, lies gold. Unimaginable quantities of gold. This gold will make Mali the wealthiest empire on earth. Long before Mali, this region saw the rise of great kingdoms. The Ghana Empire dominated West Africa from the 6th to the 11th centuries. Despite its name, ancient Ghana was located northwest of modern Ghana, in what is now Mauritania and Mali. Ghana controlled the gold-sought trade and grew fabulously wealthy. Arab scholars wrote of Ghana's king holding court in a pavilion surrounded by horses draped in gold cloth, with pages carrying gold-hilted swords and shields of gold. But Ghana fell. Overextension, internal strife, and invasion by the Almoravids weakened the empire. By the 13th century, Ghana had collapsed into smaller kingdoms. From the ruins, a new power emerged, the Soso kingdom under the Sosera king Sumanguru Kante, who conquered the fragmented territories and ruled through fear and iron. But Sumanguru's tyranny would not last. The story of Mali begins with a prophecy and a young prince named Sundiata Keita. According to the oral tradition passed down by griots, the historian storytellers of West Africa, Sundiata was born around 1217 in the small kingdom of Kangaba. His mother was Sogolon, often called the Buffalo Woman. Prophecy declared that Sundiata would become a great king, but young Sundiata was sickly and could not walk. His people mocked him. When his father died, rivals drove Sundiata and his mother into exile. Years passed. Sundiata grew strong, and when Sumanguru Kante conquered Kangaba and oppressed the Mandinka people, the exiled prince returned. In 1235, at the Battle of Kirina, Sundiata defeated Sumanguru using both military strategy and psychological warfare. Legend says that Sundiata discovered Sumanguru's weakness, a fear of the spear of a white rooster, and used it to break the Sosara king's power. Sundiata united the Mandinka clans and established the Mali Empire with its capital at Niani. He created the Kurukan Fuga, a constitution that established laws, promoted trade, and protected the environment. Sundiata ruled until around 1255, laying the foundation for an empire that would dominate West Africa for centuries. By the time Mansa Musa ascended to power in 1312, the Mali Empire had grown into a giant. Mali stretched over 1,000 miles from the Atlantic coast to beyond the Niger Bend. It encompassed modern-day Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Mauritania, and parts of Niger and Burkina Faso. Millions of people lived under Mali's rule. The empire controlled two precious commodities that the medieval world desperately needed: gold and salt. The gold came from the Bambouk and Bure gold fields, rich deposits that produced half of the world's gold supply during this period. European and Islamic currencies depended on West African gold. Without it, their economies would collapse. The salt came from mines deep in the Sahara, particularly Tagaza, where slabs of salt were cut from the earth and transported south. In the hot, humid regions of West Africa, salt was essential for preserving food, maintaining health, and seasoning meals. It was so valuable that it was traded pound for pound with gold in some markets. Mali sat at the crossroads of these trade routes. Caravans from North Africa brought salt, cloth, horses, and books. Caravans from the south brought gold, ivory, cola nuts, and enslaved people. In cities like Timbuktu, Gao, Jane, and Niani, merchants from across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe conducted business. Mali grew wealthy beyond imagination. Mansa Musa's full title was Musa Keita I. He was born around 1280, a member of the Keita dynasty that Sundiata had established. How Musa came to power remains debated. According to some accounts, the previous Mansa, Abubakar II, was obsessed with exploring the Atlantic Ocean. He organized a fleet of 200 ships to sail west and discover what lay beyond the horizon. Abubakar II never returned. In his absence, Musa, serving as deputy, became Mansa. Mansa Musa was intelligent, devout, and ambitious. He was a practicing Muslim in an empire where Islam and traditional African religions coexisted. He understood both the spiritual importance of Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, and the political importance of displaying Mali's wealth and power to the Islamic world. He ruled with a combination of religious devotion, strategic intelligence, and overwhelming generosity. His reign would last 25 years and transform Mali into a legend. The Mali Empire was not a chaotic collection of tribes. It was a sophisticated state with a complex government structure. At the top sat the Mansa, the emperor whose word was law. But the Mansa did not rule alone. Below him were the provincial governors called Fabas, who managed distant territories and collected taxes. Each province maintained local traditions while remaining loyal to the empire. The royal council consisted of nobles, religious leaders, and military commanders who advised the Mansa on matters of state. Griots served as historians, advisors, and diplomats, preserving oral traditions and negotiating between kingdoms. The military was organized and disciplined with cavalry units, infantry, and archers. Mali's army numbered in the tens of thousands and could be mobilized quickly to defend borders or expand territory. A judicial system based on both Islamic law and traditional customs maintained order. Markets were regulated, trade routes were protected, crimes were punished. This was not a primitive society. This was a functioning empire with bureaucracy, laws, and institutions. Walk through the markets of Timbuktu and you would hear a dozen languages: Arabic, Tamashek, Mandinka, Fulani, Songhai, and more. Merchants from North Africa arrived with caravans of camels, bringing salt, dates, cloth, horses, and precious manuscripts. They wore flowing robes and turbans, their faces veiled against the desert sun. Wangara merchants, Mandinka traders who controlled the gold supply, operated in secrecy. They never revealed the location of the gold fields. When trading, they used the silent barter system, leaving gold at designated spots, allowing buyers to place goods in exchange and returning later to collect their trade items. This mystery kept Mali's gold sources hidden from foreign powers. Dula merchants, a Mandinka subgroup specializing in long-distance trade, established commercial networks across West Africa, spreading Islam and creating trade diasporas in distant cities. Jewish and Berber traders traveled from North Africa and the Mediterranean, seeking gold and ivory. These merchants did not just trade goods, they traded ideas, technologies, religious beliefs, and cultural practices. Timbuktu became a crossroads of civilization. Mali's wealth bought something more valuable than gold: knowledge. Mansa Musa was a devoted Muslim, and he invested heavily in Islamic education and scholarship. He built mosques and madrasas, Islamic schools, throughout the empire. In Timbuktu, the Sankore Mosque became one of the world's great centers of learning. Scholars from across the Islamic world traveled to Timbuktu to study and teach. The University of Sankore rivaled universities in Cairo, Baghdad, and Cordoba. Students studied the Quran, Islamic law, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history, and literature. Libraries house thousands of manuscripts, books on science, philosophy, poetry, and theology, many written by African scholars. One famous scholar was Ahmad Baba al-Masufi. Though he lived after Mansa Musa's time, he represents the intellectual tradition Musa established. These scholars wrote treatises, debated theology, and preserved knowledge. Islamic judges called Qadis administered justice based on Sharia law, while traditional African customs were respected in local disputes. This intellectual flourishing occurred in cities that Europeans would later dismiss as primitive. The irony is bitter. While European monks copied texts in cold monasteries, African scholars debated philosophy under West African skies. But what of the common people, the farmers, artisans, herders, and laborers who formed the backbone of Mali's society? Most Malians were farmers, growing millet, sorghum, rice, and vegetables along the Niger River. They raised cattle, goats, and chickens. They fished in rivers and lakes. Our artisans crafted beautiful objects. Blacksmiths forged tools and weapons. Weavers created intricate textiles. Potters shaped clay vessels. Leather workers made bags and shoes. And goldsmiths created jewelry of stunning beauty. Women played vital roles, farming, trading in local markets, raising children, and maintaining households. Some women held significant influence, particularly in matrilineal societies where descent was traced through the mother. Enslaved people also existed in Mali, captured in warfare or born into servitude. However, slavery in medieval Mali differed from the brutal plantation slavery that would later devastate Africa. Enslaved people could own property, marry, and sometimes buy their freedom. Some rose to positions of authority. Life for common Malians was hard but not hopeless. The empire provided stability, protection from raiders, and opportunities for trade. Compared to the chaos of earlier periods, Mali offered peace. When Mansa Musa assumed power in 1312, he inherited a vast but complex empire. His first priority was consolidation. He strengthened administrative control over distant provinces. He appointed loyal governors. He ensured trade routes remained safe and profitable. Mali's wealth continued to grow. Gold flowed from the mines. Salt caravans traversed the Sahara. Timbuktu and Gao flourished as commercial hubs. But Mansa Musa wanted more than wealth. He wanted recognition. He wanted the Islamic world to acknowledge Mali as a great Muslim empire. And he wanted to fulfill his religious obligation, the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that every able Muslim should undertake once in their lifetime. In 1324, Mansa Musa made the decision that would immortalize his name. He would journey to Mecca. Preparing for such a journey required months of planning. Mansa Musa would not travel alone. He would bring thousands of people, soldiers for protection, officials to manage affairs, scholars for religious guidance, servants to handle logistics, and hundreds of enslaved people to carry supplies. He would bring gifts, vast quantities of gold to distribute as charity, as the Islamic tradition demanded. He would bring horses, camels, and provisions for the long journey across the Sahara, through Egypt and into Arabia. Across Mali, craftsmen prepared goods for the journey. Goldsmiths melted and shaped gold into bars and ingots. Weavers created fine garments. Leather workers made bags and saddles. Mansa Musa selected his entourage carefully. Trusted advisors, military commanders, religious leaders, and representatives from major provinces. This pilgrimage would showcase Mali's wealth and unity. By early 1324, the caravan was ready. Picture the caravan as it departs from Niani in early 1324. At the front rides Mansa Musa, dressed in flowing robes of the finest fabric. His turban wrapped expertly, his bearing regal and commanding. Behind him stretches a procession that defies imagination. 60,000 men, including soldiers, officials, merchants, and servants, with 12,000 enslaved people, each dressed in Persian silk and brocade, some carrying golden staffs. 80 camels, each bearing 300 pounds of gold dust in leather bags. Hundreds more camels carrying food, water, tents, and supplies. Horses from North Africa prized for their speed and endurance. Cattle and goats to be slaughtered for food along the way. This is not just a pilgrimage, this is a statement. The caravan moves north toward the Sahara. The journey will take months, crossing deserts, navigating by stars, stopping at oases, enduring sandstorms and scorching heat. Griots sing songs praising Mansa Musa. Drummers set the rhythm of the march. Soldiers scout ahead for bandits or hostile tribes. At each stop, Mansa Musa displays his wealth. He gives gold to local rulers, distributes arms to the poor, commissions the construction of mosques. The legend of the Golden King spreads ahead of him like wildfire. In July 1324, Mansa Musa's caravan arrives in Cairo, the jewel of the Islamic world. Cairo is a city of minarets and markets, palaces, and poverty. It is the capital of the Mamluk Sultanate, one of the most powerful Muslim states. Sultan Al-Nasir Muhammad rules Egypt, and he expects foreign rulers to show him respect. But Mansa Musa is no ordinary ruler. When officials invite him to meet the Sultan, protocol demands that Musa prostrate himself before Al-Nasir Muhammad. Mansa Musa refuses. He explains that he prostrates only before God, never before another man. This causes a diplomatic incident. The Egyptians are offended, but Mansa Musa's reputation precedes him. This man commands unimaginable wealth. The Sultan decides to overlook the insult. Mansa Musa stays in Cairo for 3 months. During this time, he purchases supplies, meets with scholars, and most famously, distributes gold with such extravagance that he crashes the Egyptian economy. He gives gold to officials, beggars, merchants, religious leaders, anyone he encounters. He commissions buildings. He buys goods at inflated prices, paying in gold without haggling. Contemporary historians record that so much gold flooded Cairo that its value plummeted. The price of goods skyrocketed. Inflation raged. The economy would not recover for over a decade. One historian writes that Mansa Musa left Cairo with the greatest respect and admiration, but also with a trail of economic chaos. From Cairo, the caravan travels to the Hijaz, the region of Arabia containing Islam's holiest cities, Medina and Mecca. In Medina, Mansa Musa visits the Prophet Muhammad's mosque. He prays, he gives charity, he meets with religious scholars and discusses Islamic theology. Then the caravan moves toward Mecca for the Hajj rituals. Mecca sits in a valley surrounded by mountains. The Kaaba, the cube-shaped structure covered in black cloth, stands at the center of the Grand Mosque. This is the direction Muslims face when they pray, the spiritual heart of Islam. Mansa Musa performs the tawaf, circling the Kaaba 7 times. He walks between the hills of Safa and Marwa, retracing Hagar's desperate search for water. He stands on the plain of Arafat, praying and reflecting. He throws stones at pillars representing Satan. These rituals connect him to millions of Muslims across history, from the Prophet Muhammad to the poorest pilgrim. For Mansa Musa, this is the pinnacle of his life, a moment of spiritual fulfillment and connection to God. But even here, his generosity is legendary. He distributes gold to Meccan officials, funds repairs to infrastructure, and supports poor pilgrims. The return journey begins in 1325. Mansa Musa has spent so much gold that he now faces a problem. He needs money for the journey home. In a moment of irony, The richest man in the world takes out loans from Egyptian merchants at high interest rates. This is the only recorded instance of Mansa Musa borrowing money. The caravan retraces its steps through Egypt. In Cairo, Mansa Musa attempts to stabilize the economy by buying back gold at inflated prices, partially reversing the damage. The journey across the Sahara is slower now, as the caravan has fewer resources, but Mansa Musa brings treasures of a different kind. Scholars, architects, poets, and religious leaders whom he recruited from Egypt and Arabia. Among them is Abu Ishaq as-Sahili, a renowned architect and poet from Granada, Spain. Mansa Musa convinces as-Sahili to return to Mali and help build mosques and palaces. After months of travel, the caravan finally returns to Mali in 1325. The pilgrimage is complete. Mansa Musa returns to Mali changed. He has seen the great cities of the Islamic world, Cairo, Mecca, Medina. He has met scholars, architects, and thinkers. He wants Mali to match their splendor. With Abu Ishaq al-Sahili's guidance, Mansa Musa embarks on an ambitious building program. In Timbuktu, the Jingwereba Mosque rises, a masterpiece of Sudano-Sahelian architecture with thick mud brick walls, wooden support beams protruding like ribs, and a towering minaret. This mosque still stands today, over 700 years later. The Sankore Mosque and University expand. Libraries fill with manuscripts. Students from across West Africa travel to Timbuktu to study. In Gao, another great mosque is constructed, cementing the city's importance as a commercial and spiritual center. Mansa Musa builds palaces, administrative buildings, and caravanserais, inns where merchants can rest and trade safely. He encourages agriculture, ensuring food security. He maintains the trade routes, providing military protection for caravans. He establishes diplomatic relations with North African states, exchanging ambassadors and gifts. Under Mansa Musa, Timbuktu becomes synonymous with wealth and learning. European and Arab scholars write about this legendary city in the heart of Africa, a place of God and knowledge. As Mansa Musa ages, he focuses on ensuring Mali's stability after his death. He appoints his son, Maghan, as heir and trains him in governance. He maintains strong relationships with provincial governors, ensuring their loyalty. He continues to support Islamic scholarship and infrastructure. He mediates disputes. He prays daily, maintaining the deep faith that defined his reign. Contemporary accounts describe an empire at its zenith, prosperous, stable, and respected throughout the Islamic world. In 1337, after a reign of 25 years, Mansa Musa dies. The exact circumstances of his death are not recorded, but his legacy is undeniable. He transformed Mali from a powerful regional kingdom into an empire whose fame reached Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. His son Maghan inherits the throne, but the empire will never again reach the heights it achieved under Mansa Musa.
For centuries, European historians portrayed Africa as a backward, primitive, uncivilized place, a dark continent waiting for European enlightenment. This narrative is a lie. While Europe languished in the Middle Ages, African empires like Mali thrived. Timbuktu's libraries contained hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, and philosophy. The University of Sankore educated students when most Europeans were illiterate. Mali's administrative systems, legal codes, and economic structures were sophisticated and effective. The empire maintained peace over a vast territory for centuries. European scholars knew about Mali. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, a famous medieval map, depicts Mansa Musa sitting on a throne, holding a golden orb, with text describing him as the richest and most distinguished ruler of this region. But later, as Europe colonized Africa, these truths were buried. African achievements were erased from history textbooks. The narrative shifted to justify exploitation. Africans were painted as savages needing European civilization. Mansa Musa's story destroys this myth. His Mali was wealthy, educated, and organized, a beacon of civilization in its time.
One of Mali's greatest secrets was the silent barter system used by the Wangara merchants to trade gold. The gold fields of Bambouk and Bouré were hidden from outsiders. To protect these sources, the Wangara developed a system of trade that required no direct contact. Merchants from the north would arrive at designated trading spots. They would display their goods, salt cloth, horses, and beat drums to signal their presence. Then they would withdraw out of sight. Wangara traders would emerge, examine the goods, and leave gold next to items they wanted. Then they would withdraw. The northern merchants would return. If satisfied with the amount of gold, they would take it and leave the goods. If not, they would withdraw again, and the Wangara would add more gold or remove it. This process continued until both parties were satisfied. No words were spoken, no locations revealed. The Wangara gold sources remained secret for centuries. This system demonstrates African innovation and economic sophistication, a peaceful, efficient method of trade that protected valuable resources while facilitating commerce. History often forgets women, and Mali's history is no exception. But women played crucial roles in the Mali Empire. Queens and royal women wielded significant influence. Mansa Musa's senior wife managed the royal household and advised on important matters. In matrilineal societies within the empire, descent and inheritance passed through the mother's line. Women controlled property and had economic power. Women dominated local markets, trading food, cloth, pottery, and other goods. They were farmers, artisans, and entrepreneurs. Griot women, female griots, preserved oral traditions, sang at ceremonies, and advised leaders. Islamic education was not limited to men. While fewer in number, some women studied at madrasas and became scholars. The erasure of women from Mali's history is not because they were absent, it's because historians failed to record their contributions. Reconstructing their stories requires reading between the lines, listening to oral traditions, and acknowledging the biases of written sources. We cannot discuss Mali without addressing slavery, a painful and complex topic. Slavery existed in the Mali Empire. Enslaved people were captured in warfare, sold by other kingdoms, or born into servitude. Mansa Musa's caravan included 12,000 enslaved people. However, slavery in medieval Mali differed significantly from the transatlantic slave trade that would later devastate Africa. In Mali, enslaved people could own property, marry, and sometimes purchase freedom. They worked as domestic servants, agricultural laborers, soldiers, and even administrators. Some enslaved people rose to positions of power and influence. This does not excuse slavery. It was still an unjust system that stripped people of freedom. But understanding the differences matters. The transatlantic slave trade, which began in the 15th century, was fundamentally different, industrial in scale, racial in justification, and brutal beyond measure. Millions of Africans were captured, chained, shipped across the ocean, and are worked to death on plantations. Mali's internal slavery was wrong, but it was not the racialized genocidal system that colonialism brought. This distinction is important for understanding African history without excusing injustice. Mansa Musa's death in 1337 marked the beginning of Mali's slow decline. His son Magan ruled briefly but lacked his father's strength and vision. He was succeeded by his uncle Suleiman, who maintained stability for a time. But internal conflicts arose. Provincial governors grew powerful and independent. The empire fragmented. External pressures mounted. The Mossi kingdom raided from the south. Tuareg Berbers attacked from the north, eventually capturing Timbuktu in 1433. The Songhai Empire, once a vassal state within Mali, grew powerful under leaders like Sunni Ali Bey. In 1464, Sunni Ali began conquering Mali's territories, establishing Songhai as the new dominant power in West Africa. By the 16th century, Mali had shrunk to a small kingdom, a shadow of its former glory. The reasons for decline were multiple: succession disputes, overextension, loss of control over trade routes, and the rise of rival powers. But Mali's legacy endured. The cities it built, the trade networks it established, and the intellectual traditions it fostered continued under Songhai and beyond. Mali's economic impact on the medieval world cannot be overstated. West African gold fueled the economies of Europe and the Islamic world. Without it, European kingdoms could not mint coins, pay armies, or conduct trade. The Italian city-states, Venice, Florence, Genoa, depended on gold that ultimately came from Mali's mines. The trans-Saharan trade routes that Mali controlled connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean, creating a global economy centuries before European colonial expansion. When Mali declined, the disruption of gold supplies contributed to economic instability in Europe and North Africa. Songhai maintained the trade for a time, but by the 16th century, European maritime exploration sought new routes to African gold, bypassing the Sahara. The slave trade that followed was in part driven by Europe's desire to control African resources directly, including gold, ivory, and human labor. Mali's wealth reshaped the world, but that wealth also made Africa a target for exploitation. Timbuktu became a symbol, a city of learning, wealth, and mystery. The manuscripts preserved in Timbuktu's libraries represent one of Africa's greatest intellectual treasures. These documents contain knowledge on medicine, mathematics, astronomy, law, history, and theology written by African scholars. In recent decades, efforts to preserve these manuscripts have revealed the depth of African scholarship. Families in Timbuktu hid manuscripts during wars and occupations, protecting them from destruction. These texts prove that Africa had rich intellectual traditions long before colonialism. African scholars wrote poetry, debated philosophy, and made scientific discoveries. Mansa Musa's investment in education created institutions that lasted centuries and influenced West African culture profoundly. Islam became deeply rooted in West Africa, blending with traditional beliefs to create unique cultural practices, Sufi brotherhoods, musical traditions, architectural styles, and social structures. The griots oral traditions, which preserved Mali's history, continue today. Songs about Sundiata and Mansa Musa are still sung in West Africa. Mali established a model of governance, centralized authority balanced with local autonomy, laws that protected trade and maintained order, and diplomacy that built alliances. Subsequent empires, Songhai, Kanem-Bornu, and others, learned from Mali's successes and failures. Modern West African nations inherited borders drawn by colonizers, but the memory of Mali remains powerful. The Republic of Mali, established in 1960, takes its name from the ancient empire, a conscious choice to honor that legacy. The national pride in Mansa Musa and Sundiata Keita is profound. Statues, currency, and national symbols reference the empire. Mali's model of multi-ethnic governance, bringing together Mandinka, Fulani, Songhai, Tuareg, and other groups, offers lessons for modern African nations struggling with ethnic conflicts and political instability. The principle that empires rise through trade, diplomacy, and education rather than just military conquest remains relevant today. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage had profound religious consequences. It announced to the Islamic world that West Africa was not peripheral but central to the Muslim community. African Muslims were not recent converts, but practitioners of a faith deeply rooted in their societies. The mosques Mansa Musa built became centers of Islamic practice that have endured for centuries. The Jingwe Reba Mosque in Timbuktu still holds prayers today. His patronage of Islamic scholarship established West Africa as a major center of Islamic learning. Scholars from Timbuktu traveled to Cairo, Mecca, and beyond, contributing to global Islamic intellectual discourse. The blending of Islam with African traditions created unique expressions of faith. Sufi practices infused with local customs, architectural styles adapted to West African materials and climate, and social structures that balanced Islamic law with traditional African values. Today, Mali, Senegal, Guinea, and neighboring countries remain predominantly Muslim, a legacy that traces back to empires like Mali that made Islam integral to West African identity. In recent decades, Mansa Musa has experienced a renaissance in popular consciousness. Articles declaring him the richest man in history circulate online. His story appears in history textbooks that once ignored African achievement. Documentaries, podcasts, and educational videos explore his life. This renewed interest reflects a broader movement to reclaim African history from colonial distortion. Young Africans and people of African descent worldwide take pride in Mansa Musa's story, proof that African civilizations achieved greatness long before European contact. Musicians reference Mansa Musa in lyrics, artists paint him in golden splendor. Writers imagine his world in novels and stories. The legend of Timbuktu, once synonymous with the middle of nowhere, in Western imagination, is being reclaimed as a symbol of African intellectual achievement. This cultural reclamation matters because it challenges narratives that justified colonialism and slavery. It reminds the world that Africa has always been home to sophisticated civilizations, brilliant minds, and powerful empires. Mansa Musa's legacy is not just historical, it is political, cultural, and deeply personal for millions who see in his story a reflection of what Africa was and what it can be again. What can modern Africa learn from Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire? First, that Africa's wealth, gold, diamonds, oil, rare minerals should benefit Africans. Mali controlled its resources and used them to build infrastructure, support education, and create prosperity. Today, too often, African resources enrich foreign corporations while Africans remain poor. Second, that education and knowledge are foundations of power. Mansa Musa invested in libraries, universities, and scholars. He understood that economic power without intellectual development is hollow. Modern African nations must prioritize education, preserve indigenous knowledge, and support African scholars and innovators. Third, that unity brings strength. Mali brought together diverse ethnic groups under a common political structure while respecting local traditions. Modern African nations, often divided by ethnicity and religion, can learn from this model of unity in diversity. Fourth, that Africa must tell its own stories. For too long, others have defined African history. Mansa Musa's story was nearly lost because European historians dismissed or ignored it. Africans must reclaim their narratives, preserve their histories, and celebrate their achievements. Fifth, that faith and culture can coexist. Mali blended Islam with African traditions, creating a unique civilization. This balance remains relevant in debates about religion, tradition, and modernity in contemporary Africa. The Mali Empire was not perfect. It had slavery, warfare, and inequality, but it also had brilliance, wealth, learning, and power. It proved that African civilizations could rival any in the world. That lesson echoes through time. So what is the ultimate lesson of Mansa Musa's story? It is this: Africa has always been a land of greatness. For centuries, the world has been told a lie, that Africa was backward, primitive, and uncivilized until Europeans arrived to save it. This narrative justified slavery, colonialism, and exploitation. It stripped Africans of their dignity and their history. Mansa Musa's story shatters that lie completely. Here was a man who ruled an empire larger than Western Europe, a man whose wealth surpassed that of any European king, a man who built universities when most Europeans could not read, a man whose pilgrimage was so grand that it entered the historical record across 3 continents. And he was not an anomaly. He was part of a tradition. Sundiata before him, the Songhai emperors after him, the scholars of Timbuktu, the merchants who connected continents, the artisans who created beauty, the farmers who fed millions. Africa has always had history. Africa has always had civilization. Africa has always had brilliance. The tragedy is not that these things didn't exist. It's that they were hidden, erased, and denied. When we study Mansa Musa, we are not discovering something new. We are uncovering something that was buried. We are reclaiming a truth that was stolen. This matters because history shapes identity. If you believe your ancestors were primitive, you see yourself as inferior. If you know your ancestors built empires, you see yourself as capable of greatness. For young Africans, Mansa Musa's story is empowering. It says your heritage is glorious, your history is rich, you come from excellence. For the world, his story is humbling. It says Africa was never the dark continent. It was a beacon of light that the world chose to ignore. The gold that Mansa Musa distributed in Cairo was not just wealth, it was a message. It said, we are here, we are powerful, we matter. That message echoes today. Africa is rising again, economically, culturally, politically. African music dominates global charts. African writers win Nobel Prizes. African innovators create technologies that change the world. African voices demand to be heard. This is not a new beginning, this is a return. The spirit of Mansa Musa, ambitious, generous, faithful, proud, lives on in every African who refuses to be defined by others, who claims their history, who builds their future. The Mali Empire fell, but its legacy endures. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Empires may crumble, but the truth of what they achieved cannot be destroyed. Mansa Musa walked across the Sahara with 60,000 men and 80 camels bearing gold. He prayed at the Kaaba. He built mosques that stand today. He transformed his empire into a legend. He did all this to fulfill a religious duty and to announce Mali's greatness to the world. He succeeded beyond measure. 700 years later, we still speak his name. 700 years later, his story still inspires. 700 years later, the legacy of the Mali Empire still reminds us that Africa has always been and will always be a land of greatness. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Mansa Musa and the golden age of the Mali Empire. This story is one of many hidden treasures in African history. Stories of kings and queens, warriors and scholars, innovators and artists who shaped the world but whose names have been forgotten or ignored. Here at Africa Hidden History, our mission is to uncover these stories, to bring them into the light, and to remind the world of Africa's incredible past. If you enjoyed this documentary, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Give us a thumbs up if you learned something new, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear this story. Leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most about Mansa Musa's story. What other African historical figures or events should we cover next? We love hearing from you, and your suggestions help us create content that matters to our community. In our next episode, we'll explore another hidden chapter of African history, one filled with drama, courage, and untold truths. You won't want to miss it. Recommended next episode, The Kingdom of Kush. When black pharaohs ruled Egypt, or Queen Nzinga of Ndongo, the warrior queen who defied Portugal for 40 years. Until next time, remember, Africa's history is humanity's history, and the truth cannot remain hidden forever. This is Africa Hidden History. Keep exploring, keep learning, keep sharing the truth.